Hello and welcome, everybody. We've got another edition of the Tight 10, once again by Zain Danani. Let's get into it. Not going to waste any time today. The information today is going to be nice, short, and sweet. We might actually have a Tight 10 for once instead of it being a Tight 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. So let's get into it. This is a week one matchup note because it's about defense, but at the same time, still important to note when teams are playing the Bills. New defensive coordinator Jim Leonard is scrapping the old 4-3 for a dramatically different system featuring a 3-4 front with unconventional and aggressive blitz-heavy schemes. That's interesting because week one, they're playing against a new offensive line with the Houston Texans, who in consensus ranks are in the bottom third, actually, of all consensus ranks. So you've got a new offensive line that might be a little bit improved, and then CJ Stroud that's going against it, that's going to get a blitz heavy scheme that's coming after him. A reason to fade the Texans offense in week one. Yes, something to remember. If you haven't watched my other reports, go back and do that. Every single report builds on top of each other. There's some topics that come up again and again because there's more reports that are about the same topic, but you may pick up something new. So go back and watch some of the other reports that I've done. Next item on the list is Joe Burrow. He's entering 2026 with the same 5 offensive linemen returning to start in front of him for the first time in his career. I've talked about this before, but offensive line continuity is huge. And so when we think about how the Bengals have performed early season in years past, they've struggled right out of the gate. I think there's a chance that they start faster for once because they have that offensive line continuity and truly like their whole offense continuity in general. So I'm excited about that. That should really help efficiency, protection, different things like that. And again, a fast start. Interesting here, multiple reports about the Colts backfield. We'll start with the RB2 situation. It sounds like it's going to be a training camp battle between Seth McGowan and DJ Giddens. I've talked about this before as well, but there is still a chance, and this wasn't part of the report, but it's something I've read in other reports. There is still a chance they add a veteran free agent. We know that Najee Harris, Antonio Gibson, Kareem Hunt, those types of names are out there still. So it's not a guarantee that either one of these guys would be the backup in case Jonathan Taylor gets hurt. That means that they're pretty much both fades at the moment until we get more information, until we see some of these veterans maybe sign somewhere else or even sign with this team. So we're going to keep a close eye on that battle during training camp. The other part of this article was probably more important, but it is the chance that Jonathan Taylor could be a hold-in during training camp. I'm on record saying that James Cook should be going above Jonathan Taylor in drafts right now because James Cook is likely to have an additional pass down role that he didn't have in previous seasons. And now we're talking about some drama when it comes to Jonathan Taylor. If this goes into training camp where he is actually holding in, I do think that we're going to end up seeing his ADP fall a little bit. So if you're in a best ball league or if you're drafting right now, and you're drafting again later and you're doing more of a portfolio based approach, this is a player that you could see have his ADP fall a little bit later in the summer. If he does do that hold in, there's no guarantee that the Colts are going to give him a contract extension. They could just decide, hey, he's a good running back. We're going to give him the tag next year, and that's how we're going to play this going forward, given his age. This was interesting too. From a different article in The Athletic, they were talking about the A.J. Brown acquisition for the Patriots, and the angle that was taken here was a lot different than what I've kind of thought through when it comes to A.J. Brown, but basically, they saw single high safety looks at the 5th highest rate in the league in the second half of last year. So single high being one safety being back, more so cover 3 situations, sometimes cover 1 situations like that where you're basically taking a safety and putting them closer to the box. So my thought process here is that this is something that could really help the run game. if you're able to say that AJ Brown makes teams think that they want to play a little bit more too high safety because he can take the top off the defense, he can just do more dynamic things and take a guy out of the box, that's going to lead to more explosive run opportunities. We're looking at 7-man box fronts instead of 8. And that would be huge for the running game with Ramondre Stevenson and Travion Henderson to be able to take advantage of that. What it can also do is open up more shallow and intermediate routes for guys like Romeo Doubs, Hunter Henry, guys like that may see a little bit more opportunity because you're going to have one more safety playing further back on the field. Then there was something in ESPN by Courtney Cronin. Courtney is one of the local beats here in Chicago, talking about Rome Odunze, and a lot of it kind of is speculation, but it is an article that was talking about things that she's watching for that people should be watching for at Bears training camp. And the big thing here was that she mentioned him as somebody who she's watching because he has the opportunity for 2 things. One, he could establish himself as the wide receiver 1. She also mentions that Luther Burden is also jockeying for that. But then she also mentioned that Rome did not get surgery on his foot. But still, there is a question based on how it is worded of whether he will look explosive with his new normal foot situation. So again, he gave this long quote earlier in the offseason for those who did not pay attention. This is my new normal. And it's not from a standpoint that I'm always in pain, but the way my foot broke, there's callus in there that creates a different type of foot structure with those bones, different types of things that kind of shift things around. So my new normal was kind of what I'm going into. And I don't think that that's anything that's going to prohibit me from making plays. But I feel like with the break, it's just like when you tear your AC joint, it's never really back to normal. I'm scared about that. I know that there's varying opinions from doctors, but it is something that I don't like hearing, especially when I see that there's really talented guys also vying for target opportunities on that team. I'm more into Luther Burden and Colston Loveland this season than Rome Odunze, who I think is going to play in an intermediate and deep role, given the skill sets of Luther Burden and what Ben Johnson has said. Luther Burden and Colston Loveland and what Ben Johnson has said about those guys. If you're not already subscribed, please like, subscribe, share this YouTube podcast, whatever you're listening to this on. Please share this with friends. Trying to get my numbers up a little bit, but if you like it, I think this is a good way for people to get caught up on news as quickly as possible. Another article out there that I saw from the Pewter Report was talking about the Bucs offense, and it was really going into detail about the offensive upside that we could see. Talking about how Baker Mayfield was destroyed last year with 8 different injuries that started as early as week 2. I think we all know that he was honestly a dark horse MVP candidate the first few weeks of the season because he was performing really well. Things were firing all cylinders. Bucca also was kind of in that like definitely rookie of the year conversation to start the season as well. And then things just fell off. Baker got injured. The offensive line was ravaged by injuries. Bucca suffered a hamstring injury. And then so did Mike Evans, Godwin, McMillan, Bucky also had injuries. Things just fell apart. This is one team that I think is a really strong bounce back candidate. Baker Mayfield's a good target from my perspective, given where he's going in drafts. One of the later quarterbacks that has a lot of upside, in my opinion, to deliver some good value. So I'm interested. I'm also interested in Nick Bucca. He's kind of a guy that I'm mixing right now because the way that I see him playing into the way that I'm seeing him play into everything is just there. He goes where a lot of other guys that I like are going. So Garrett Wilson, Lad McConkey, guys like that. So I would just kind of mix and match if you're taking a portfolio approach. Garrett Wilson is my preference above all of those guys if you're just doing one draft. Another nugget that I found yesterday was just about the Falcons and how they're switching from an outside zone heavy team to be like more of a normal outside zone team. They were a little bit of an outlier last year, but they were doing kind of like a 45 to 50% or more outside zone, and now they're going to be going to more of like a 25 to 35% outside zone. I'm not that concerned because Bijan's just honestly just an incredible talent. But it is worth noting that that means that they'll probably do more man gap scheme stuff, which is where the team basically designs a play for uh, the running game to go directly through a specific hole instead of the running back kind of determining where he sees a crease and going. And it is just a nuance. So I think Bijan's clearly the 1.2 this season, but it is something that I'm keeping my eye on in case that running game is like a little bit slow to start, just given that there's nuances to how the scheme is changing. Ravens' biggest camp battles from the Athletic was talking about wide receiver 3, the number 2 tight end role, and number 3 running back role. It's basically for wide receiver 3 between Tez Walker, Elijah Surratt, Jacoby Lane, and then any veteran free agent that they sign who could also easily end up being wide receiver 2 for their team if you're not a huge Rashad Bateman fan. But Rashad Bateman is definitely the wide receiver 2 right now as the roster stands. If they sign Stephon Diggs, it would clearly be Rashad Bateman being receiver 3. If they sign Keenan Allen or Debo or something like that, I think it could be an argument made that they would be wide receiver 2, but we don't necessarily know. So something to keep an eye on. But it is Tez Walker versus Surratt versus Jacoby Lane for that wide receiver 3 role right now. If I had to pick long term who I think it'll end up be that wins, it's going to be Elijah Surratt. I could easily see it being Tez Walker to start the season. And then running back 2 is Adam Randall versus Rasheen Ali. And these are guys that I think are like the true handcuff to Derrick Henry. And the favorite right now is Adam Randall. So definitely something to watch. They're also live to sign a tight end, in my opinion, as like a tight end 2. And it doesn't have to be a traditional tight end. It could be a guy like Darren Waller, Jonnu Smith, Zach Ertz, like any of those guys are live to be on that team too. An article from the Panthers team website talking about their wide receiver room. Jalen Coker and Tet McMillan are clearly their top 2 receivers. If anybody needed to hear that on Jalen Coker, he is definitely going to have really high route shares. The Panthers are famous for not really rotating receivers that much. So we're talking about 2 guys that are probably going to see 80% plus routes as long as they're healthy. I am still a little bit worried about Tet's foot that he had an injury with at training camp. It talks about that in this article too, but they're not really that concerned about it. I'm more concerned than what it seems like the team sounds like. But I just think it's an opportunity cost because he goes where Garrett Wilson is and some of the other guys I talked about. And I think this pass catching upside is this pass offense is low upside. So I can't see Tet get to like a 1,500 yard season randomly out of the blue this season. And then at wide receiver 3, it sounds like there's a mixed bag of receivers where it's kind of like a make or break season for Xavier Legette. Chris Brazzell factors into that. David Moore, Jimmy Horn, that factors into that as well. But again, wide receiver 3 in this offense, or any other pass catcher in this offense that is like just a pass catcher, so tight end receiver, is pretty much not valuable unless for some reason Chris Brazzell is just some absolute stud out there. I don't really see it being anything that's too valuable, so I don't know that there's a reason to take shots on that at the moment. Seahawks running backs. I listened to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. Really just keeps sounding like that this is going to be an RB by running back by committee situation where Jadarian Price is kind of like that lead back who gets, I can't put a 100% certainty on the percentages, but maybe 50% of the work, and then Holani gets like 30% of the work, and then Emmanuel Wilson's getting 20%, or Holani with 40 and Emmanuel Wilson getting 10, some sort of split like that. The article does mention that Holani is going to get plenty of run that for pass, and I think it's very clear that it's going to be on pass downs and some rushing work. It does say that Emmanuel Wilson will get short yardage. I don't think that's 100% guarantee. There's a possibility that ends up being Jadarian Price. It's also a possibility that it ends up being George Holani. I think George Lonnie's a great flyer at the end of drafts right now because I do think he has a role to start the season at the very least. Then it also talked about Zach Charbonnet, who they're assuming will be back kind of in that November-ish range. And if he's back in November, that means he's back by the fantasy playoffs, has maybe a couple of weeks to ramp as well, and then really stand out to where he can, hurt you in the fantasy playoffs. And who knows what role he ends up playing if he takes George Halani's pass down role or if George Halani just stands out. Or if he just gets his exact same role from last year in general, or if for some reason Jadarian Price does not look good and Zach Charbonnet somehow ends up being in that lead back role that Kenneth Walker had last season. We really don't know how it's going to play out, but I am scared of taking Jadarian Price currently, just given that I don't think that he was like the talent of a first round pick. He just happened to be a first round pick. Panthers tight end room. I think the TLDR is just don't draft anybody. They're going to be rotating, but Jatavian Sanders is going to be ready for week 1 based off of all reports. But I do think they're going to be rotating in Tommy Tremble, Mitchell Evans. But again, I don't want any other pass catchers other than Jalen Coker and Tet McMillan from this team. You guys can catch my pod that I did with Graham Barfield as well. Go to the Fantasy Points pod, go to Fantasy Points Daily, or go to the YouTube channel and you can find it there. We talked about some players in more depth like James Cook and others as well. Another article addressing the Packers where they talked about how, and this was from Bill Huber, who's a Packers insider for SI, talked about Micah Parsons. And why is this important? It's more important about what the lack of having Micah Parsons does on the offense. So the thought process here is that Micah Parsons could miss 6 or 7 games to start the season. And again, this is one of the reasons why other beat writers have cited that the Packers could be more aggressive on offense this season because they know that they're missing one of their top players on defense in Micah Parsons. And they could just lean into a little bit more pass heavy, a little bit less rotation with the receivers, making sure that they're scoring enough points to offload the pressure on the defense. So something to watch. Another thing that was interesting that I found really underrated, something I had not honestly thought about at all, but under the radar for the Jaguars rushing attack, there's a guy whose name is Pacucci. I forget what his first name is, but his last name is Pacucci. And he's a longtime lieutenant of Liam Cohen and has known him for a long time. Was with him at UMass. He was with him at UMass where he was the quarterback coach for Liam Cohen, who was a quarterback on UMass. And then he kind of stayed with him at Kentucky, came to him with the Bucks. So he's been around Liam Cohen for a long time. But the notable thing here was that he was blocked by the Bucks last year from joining Liam Cohen's staff. And now he's going to have a really strong hand with what the Jaguars do with their rushing attack. Famously, the Liam Cohen rushing attack 2 years ago with the Bucks was electric with Bucky Irving. I think that's underrated. When you don't have your clear guy, and think about all the things you got to think about when you're a head coach in the NFL with Liam Cohen, doing that for the first time, probably not spending enough time to be able to design the offense, do everything he wants to do, be super deep in the weeds on what the rushing attack looks like. It'll be good to get his guy back in. I went back and forth with Rich Rebar on Twitter about this backfield and how valuable I think Bashal Tutin could be. And, he made a really good point that the offensive line isn't there's no changes there. And I found this later in the day. And I think that this is the one thing that could point to some significant upside for the team if they change some rushing schemes, if they change some blocking techniques, different things that could help their running attack going forward. I'm filing this away for the regular season when teams face the Rams, but something of note for the Rams defense, it sounds like they're going to do a shadow technique with Jalen Watson being lined up as the shadow corner for the Rams this season. Anytime they face opposing number 1 wide receivers, Jalen Watson will be on them as long as they're. I think he can rotate into the slot too. I'll have to go back to the tape kind of remember him rotating into the slot sometimes. But he will be the number one like shadow corner for the Rams. So when you're playing against some teams and if Jalen Watson's still looking good to start the season, um, it'll be nice to know like, hey, maybe I'm not expecting the big week from AJ Brown or whoever is lined up against him, or Mike Evans, let's just say in week one, and that this could be a week to lean heavier into a Ricky Pearsall as the wide receiver too, or a George Kittle if he plays that game as the tight end. There's also a rushing scheme change for the Vikings. They're going to lean more into wide zone runs this year instead of mid zone. Mid zone is typically runs that happen more between the tackles. Wide zone being things that are like off tackle, wider than the tackle. So we're talking about like C and D gap runs. I did a big analysis on this, and like explosive rushes come from C and D gap runs. Like I think it was like 3.5x from those runs. So it'll be nice to see that. I think that could help the rushing game get more on track. And you might see some bigger spikes out of their running backs, which I am tending to lean into Jordan Mason this season. The Giants team website had an update on Malik Neighbors. And again, it's an update that's a non-update. But the Malik Neighbors news was they're not going to have a feel for his health until much later in the summer. So that to me signals like guaranteed training camp pup again. So if you're trying to take a Malik Neighbors share, if you're doing best ball, if you're doing multiple redraft leagues, I would wait a couple of weeks until training camp starts because he'll naturally drop in value given training camp pup. That'll happen. And if he hits like the real pup at the beginning, closer to the start of the season, I mean, he should drop a lot because that means he's going to be sitting quite a few weeks. But right now, what the article also mentioned was that there's no way to know at the moment, which is the same language that we saw from Jordan Renan, same language that we've heard from John Harbaugh as well. So I think, this is a very tricky situation, to say the least. All right. I'm pretty sure there's only a couple more, so just stick with me here for a second. There was a note in The Athletic on Chase Brown's role and potential extension. The writer is calling him Paul Denner, who's the beat writer for the Cincinnati Bengals, wrote this in The Athletic, but he said, Chase Brown's a centerpiece of what they do, which I think signals a similar workhorse role that he's had. And he believes that the Bengals are going to franchise tag him or work towards an extension. So that means that they're going to commit to him long term. Good to know what his plans are, what the plans are with him for Dynasty. It also is good to know what the plans are for him for redraft because it gives us more confidence that they're just going to kind of lean into him more as the season goes on. Some notes on the Steelers wide receiver 3 battle from the Steelers Depot. They're talking about Roman Wilson in the lead for the wide receiver 3 role. I still think that it could be some sort of rotation between Roman Wilson and Jeremy Bernard. For those of you who are in like dynasty leagues, thinking about who it's going to be, or like super deep leagues, or in best ball. And then again, Roman Wilson plays more of a primary slot role. So what that means is if he's on the field in 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver sets, that means that he's likely to be in the slot instead of Michael Pittman. But Jeremy Bernard's profile is more versatile. So he could be more of an outside receiver or an inside receiver in the slot. And that then opens up more opportunities for a Michael Pittman to be in the slot, which I think would help him earn another maybe like 1 or even 2 targets sometimes in games just by being in that slot role because it's just extremely beneficial. So if Jeremy Bernard takes over, that's kind of when I see Pittman kind of maybe ascend a little bit more when that ends up happening. I just did a live best ball stream with John Sarabian of Run Pure Sports. We did a 5-5-5 on DraftKings. I've actually it was kind of interesting. I didn't know that was going to be the case. Didn't know that he was dropping one of those big drafts right now. So go ahead and check that out. It was a really fun team. We kind of leaned wide receiver heavy, but you guys probably know my take on Kenny Gainwell. So if you do know my take, I think that he has a really strong chance of being the RB1 for that team, either by midseason or end of season. So we leaned into him being as our RB3 over on DraftKings, where it's a 1 point PPR. This was not from a Chiefs beat writer, but it's from Vic Tafur, who writes for The Athletic. And he was just kind of going and predicting team over-under win totals. But he did say this, which I think comes from inside information because he works with, Jesse Noel, who is the lead Chiefs beat writer for The Athletic. And he said, all signs point to Chiefs changing their offense and giving Kenneth Walker all those carries he never got with the Seahawks. And for those of you who haven't been playing fantasy for a really, really long time, like I have, Andy Reid running backs used to be one of the most profitable backfield roles in fantasy. We'd seen guys like Jamal Charles, obviously, like immense talents, do really well. But then we have also seen guys like Damian Williams do well. Not somebody that has a really significant talent, but still produce RB1 totals in small sample sizes. Brian Westbrook back in the day, again, a guy who, immense talent when he finally got his opportunity, but a guy that was drafted later. And then also Kareem Hunt, who is not like an early pick by any means in the NFL draft, who also put up RB1 stats and, put up nuclear numbers with Andy Reid. So I think there's, some opportunity here that they get back to having a lead running back who just kind of goes nuclear again. And Kenneth Walker, I talked about this on the stream with Graham Barfield, but if you told me that we looked up at the end of the season and all running backs were healthy for all the whole season, and Kenneth Walker ended up as RB4, right behind CMC, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bijan, would you think I'm crazy, or would I think you're crazy if you said that? No, I don't. I could easily see him, if they do lean into him as a workhorse, having a better season than Gene T, Jonathan Taylor, James Cook, like those types of Saquon, those players, Devon Achane. But it has to be in a really like featured role that I think could happen. I would still kind of take him after a Jonathan Taylor, probably Ashton Gene T as well. Maybe even Achane. I struggle with that one a lot, but yeah, I still think that's notable. All right, guys, that's all I have for the Tight 10 today. Keeping it short and sweet. If you haven't already liked, subscribed, or anything like that, please do so. Share this with friends and family. Really appreciate you guys following along. You can find me on X at Denani Zane. Find me on YouTube, which hopefully you're watching from there, at The Cut Up Show, or on Spotify with The Cut Up, or on Apple with The Cut Up as well. Thank you guys for watching. We'll talk again soon.